Good morning. Thank you for joining us here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida for Space Shuttle Discovery's STS-133 pre-launch news conference. Joining me today is Mike Moses, Space Shuttle Launch Integration Manager and Chair of the Mission Management Team.
Morning.
Mike Leinbach, Shuttle Launch Director.
Good morning.
Scott Higginbotham, STS-133 Payload Manager.
Good morning.
And Kathy Winters, Shuttle Weather Officer.
Good morning.
We'll hear from our panelists and then take questions. Mr. Moses.
Thanks, Kendra. Well, good morning, everybody. Today we held our Launch Minus 1 Day Mission Management Team meeting where we got together just to discuss our current status and our readiness. Everything is on track, going beautifully with the countdown, and we are more than ready for tomorrow's launch. It was a pretty short meeting. Kathy talked to us a little bit about the weather. You'll hear that today. And actually, Scott had the biggest topic of the day to wrap up an issue with Iraq in the PMM, just to make sure that it was configured properly. Some lessons we had learned from one of the other MPLMs that came down made us question what we had configured in the bay, and so they showed really good results today that said we were more than ready to fly with that configuration concern. We talked a little bit about a system, or an RCS, which is the reaction control system, the little steering thrusters on the shuttle. One of the regulators in that system is creeping, which means it's letting a little bit of pressure through instead of holding it tight, and it's creeping at a little higher rate than we allow it to. But there's no real issue with that. The other regs in line are holding just fine, and there's an isolation valve that can be closed if it needs to be. We're going to have another meeting later today to go through the details of that paperwork and sign the official waiver that says it doesn't meet the spec, but it's okay to fly. And that was really the only shuttle technical issue we talked today at all. And again, like I said, about a 40-minute meeting, went pretty fast. In other news, we finished up yesterday, a little bit this morning, the ET modifications for the next tank, ET-122, for STS-134. So the Lockheed Martin team that was here on site doing that mechanical modification and then respraying the foam on that tank has finished up, and now there's just basically the shakedown inspections, and we'll be ready for Endeavour to come over and get mated at the end of the month. And that's it, really. So we focused on the mission today, and that's kind of what I wanted to focus on today at the press conference is we're ready to fly STS-133. We've been ready from a mission standpoint for quite a while. Now our hardware is in line and ready to go. We're delivering the PMM, the Permanent Multi-Purpose Module, which will be basically a really good addition to Space Station in terms of storage capability on orbit. We're taking up the ELC-4 External Logistics Cargo Pallet, which has a spare radiator and room for other spare hardware once it gets on orbit and stowed on the station. We have two very busy EVAs to clean up a lot of activities and prepare the station for the future. And finally, he hasn't got a lot of press time lately, but Robonaut 2 still all nicely safe, tucked away in the PMM and ready to get on orbit and start his mission. We talked a lot in the past about all the science we're doing on this flight. There's a lot of science going up in the PMM, and there's a fair bit going up in the shuttle middeck that the crews will execute while we're on orbit on Space Station, and then we'll return on this mission and bring it back down. And Scott will probably tell you they're getting ready to stow a lot of that cargo here today, the late stow stuff for those science activities. So we're really looking forward to a very action-packed, successful mission, and everything's on track. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Well, everything's going extremely well on the launch countdown for Discovery's last mission. I'd like to commend the processing teams who worked on Discovery and all the other flight elements and ground systems, because what we're seeing is as we power them up in launch countdown, no problems at all. Mike mentioned the RCS reg, but that's really no big deal to us. That's the only issue we're tracking. We got a good load on our PRSD system yesterday. That's liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen for the fuel cells. We got right on the money we expected to get, so good full 8 and 9 days hold time on those two commodities. The next major activity tonight at 8 o'clock would be the retraction of the rotating service structure, give everybody a good view of Discovery on the pad for the last time. Tomorrow morning we'll get together at about 7 o'clock and talk weather for tanking. The forecast that Kathy will show you in a couple of minutes looks pretty good, and so we expect to be tanking at about 7:25. The crew, Steve Lindsay and the rest of his crew will be boarding the orbiter a little after 1:30 tomorrow afternoon, shooting for the opening of the launch window at 16:45 Eastern Time. Again, we're not tracking any issues, and Discovery looks like she'll fly this time. That's it. Scott?
All right, thanks, Mike. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to brag a little bit about the amazing collection of hardware that we're getting ready to go fly aboard Discovery. I'll start in the back end, work my way forward, and talk a little bit about what's happened in the last 4 months since we spoke to you last. First, the Permanent Multipurpose Module, PMM, the repurposed MPLM FM1 Leonardo. We're about ready to add that module to the Piazza d'Italia, as my Italian friends call it. That's the growing collection of Italian-built hardware on the International Space Station. The modifications to turn the MPLM into the PMM were predominantly performed by our partner, Thales Alenia Space, led by Roberto Barreto. That team did their work last year with our help, and then we proceeded to get the module stuffed and loaded for flight. The module's carrying up about 8,500 pounds of cargo, including the Express Rack 8 research facility. And then I think Mike mentioned our little friend Robonaut 2. My daughter made this model of R2 for me. He's my mascot. As far as we know, we've not heard any knocking sounds or any muffled cries of "Are we there yet?" coming from the module. Ends up Robonaut's powered down and he can't speak. He's ready to go in his enclosure and ready to go to work in space. We've not accessed the payload bay during the several months that we've been waiting to go fly. We had no reason to. So all the cargo complement remains as it was for the launch attempt back in the fall. The hardware stayed on board and traveled with Discovery when we went back to the VAB and then ultimately back to the pad again. Forward of the PMM, we have the Express Logistics Carrier 4, or ELC-4, which was lovingly put together by our friends up at Goddard, led by Kevin Carmack, and our team here, our Boeing team here at KSC. And on top of that Express Logistics Carrier, we have what we affectionately call the Big Honkin' Radiator, largest ORU we've ever flown in the shuttle, and hopefully we'll never have to use it, but we'll have it up there if we do need it. And also ELC-4 will serve as a resting point for some other ORUs and payloads that we will bring up in the future. So the payload bay elements are ready to go. They've been ready to go since we closed them out for flight back in mid-October when we closed the doors for flight, and they're quite content to sit for quite a while longer too. So at this point, regardless of what the weather or the vehicle throws at us, it would be our intent to keep the doors closed and just wait for that next launch attempt. Now moving forward into the middeck, we have about 1,500 pounds of cargo that's headed to the ISS in the middeck of the orbiter. That cargo complement has changed, as we did have access to that hardware, and space is dynamic, space ops are dynamic, and the needs of the station have changed since we last attempted to go fly. So we've taken advantage of the opportunity to shuffle some things around between this mission, the ATV that just launched, HTV that just launched, and Progress missions. Fortunately, with lots of different vehicles carrying cargo to the station, we can make those kinds of choices. So we have a complement on board now that best represents our current needs, and between all those flights, we are keeping the station well stocked with everything the crew needs to live and work in space. Also in the middeck, as part of that 1,500 pounds, we have a variety of different experiments, some of which are going to go across the boundary and be operated in the station, but many of which are going to just stay on the orbiter and go up and come down. The process for reinstalling those items into the orbiter began on Monday and will finish tonight, as Mike indicated. We'll start here at about noon today and should finish up around 8 p.m. tonight, getting all of those late load, time-critical experiments on board. At that point, the entire ULF-5 complement will be on board and ready to go fly. So in conclusion, this has been an exercise in patience for us, but we're anxious to finally see our hardware close to flying in space and being put to use on the International Space Station. And with that, Kathy?
Well, great payload, great weather. Right now we've had some great weather coming all the way up to launch. We've had really nice mild conditions, so we haven't had any cold temperatures to deal with even this time of year. We've just had some morning fog, and that's really about it. Tomorrow morning, though, we're not expecting to see as much fog because the winds are going to shift around to the northeast. And usually when we get an easterly flow over the coast here, we tend to have maybe some inland fog, but not fog here along the coast. So weather conditions tomorrow are even better. And as we get into the afternoon, the only thing we'll be watching for is if we're going to have any isolated coastal showers that may linger offshore and maybe be in the area in the morning. We're expecting them to die out in the afternoon and not be an issue. So we just have a 20% chance of having an isolated shower within 20 nautical miles of the shuttle landing facility or a low cloud ceiling. But overall, it looks like really good weather for launch. Also for the TAL sites, the Space Flight Meteorology Group is forecasting good weather there as well, both at Zaragoza and Morone. There's a little bit of a concern at Istris for some windy conditions with winds gusting up to 28 knots. So that may be a little bit problematic, but we do have 2 good TAL sites, so that certainly meets our needs. If we do happen to delay 24 hours, there is a frontal system, a cold front, that should push into the Florida area. It's not going to bring us a lot of weather, but it could bring us some clouds and maybe some isolated showers. It's still a little bit to the north on Friday, so if we happen to delay to Friday, we have a 30% chance KSC weather prohibiting launch. And if we happen to delay to Saturday, that lingering boundary will still be in the area, and we're concerned about low cloud ceiling or an isolated shower. So we increase our number again to a 40% chance. But for launch day, we only have a 20% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. That's all I have.
Thank you. We'll now take questions. When the microphone comes your way, please state your name, affiliation, and to whom you're addressing your question. Start over here with Marcia, please.
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press for Mike Leinbach. Discovery always seems to have been the favorite child, if you will, of the shuttle fleet.
The what?
The favorite child, the sweetheart, however you want to characterize her, fleet leader at least. Why is Discovery special for you, if it is? I'm sure it must be. And any sentiments or extra feelings for you and your team going into the last flight of Discovery?
Well, the last flight of all 3 vehicles is going to be emotional for all of us. But we're going to complete these missions as we always do, and I think the emotion will really hit on the runway after the mission is complete. I tell each of the teams that each orbiter is my favorite, so I really don't have a favorite. And they give me grief over that all the time. But Discovery is a great ship. This is their 39th mission. Would have quite a few left in her had the program been extended, but it wasn't. And so, you know, it's kind of bittersweet that we get the last flight out of her, but she's going to perform perfectly fine on orbit and bring the crew home safely. And I think on landing day, as I said, landing day is going to be tough. I think landing day of Discovery and then Endeavour, and especially Atlantis, the last mission, you'll see a lot of people out on the runway that will probably choke up some, because it's the end of a 30-year program that not only have we worked in and made our livelihoods in, but we've grown to love and appreciate and feel like we're doing something special for the country and really the world. And so it's coming to an end, and that's tough. But we're going to do it right. We're going to approach each of these 3 flights the way we've approached all the other ones, and we'll pull them off, and we'll be able to look back and be very, very proud of what we've accomplished in the shuttle program.
Okay. Next question, James.
James Dean with Florida. Just following up on that, could you talk a little bit about the relationship that processing teams have with each individual vehicle? You know, you can joke that each one is your favorite, but for the folks for whom Discovery is their vehicle, what it means to them for this to be the last flight.
Yeah, you should really probably ask those folks themselves. They'd give you a much more personal answer. But there have been people that have worked exclusively on Discovery for many, many years, 12, 15, 20 years, only been on Discovery. They know that ship like the back of their hand, literally, and so it's going to be even tougher for them to let go. But here again, you know, it's a machine. We grow to love them. They perform extremely well for the program and the nation, and it's going to be a little tough. But I would encourage you to ask, you know, Stephanie Stilson, the flow director, or Wayne Bingham, the flow manager, and especially the folks down on the floor of the OPF and the VAB and out at the pad who get to crawl around inside the vehicles and get to know the nuances of them, because they look very, very similar on the outside. Of course, each one is unique to a certain extent. And those would be the people to be able to tell you all the stories about Discovery and little nuances about the ship.
Irene.
Irene Qualtz with Reuters for either Mike Moses or Mike Leinbach. I have 2 questions. The first is one of the proposals for the commercial crew follow-on contracts was to keep the shuttles flying and operational in a commercial realm, and I think the proposal was just to do a study. So is there anything that's going to be different from what had been planned previously in case NASA does end up selecting that for funding? And then the second question is, once Discovery lands and goes through its standard flight processing, how many people will be given their notices to not come to work anymore? Thanks.
Well, let's see on the proposal out there to look at a commercial company wanting to continue to fly shuttle as a commercial endeavor is actually a proposal being submitted under our CC-Dev 2 contract, and so therefore it's in a blackout, and I'm not allowed to talk about it. But some misconceptions are out there. It's not a NASA study that's undergoing. That's a private proposal to go use our hardware. So we provided details and informations on costs, but the proposal is not ours, and we are not allowed to comment on it since it is a contract that's currently under evaluation. As far as the layoffs, there's no planned layoff specifically targeted to Discovery's last mission. It's a burn down profile that we've had for many years. There's a layoff coming in for the USA team in April, which was a planned step down in function just as we went through the profile. So just because Discovery lands and is done, that doesn't change our workforce profiles. We've gotten down to about the minimum now, and we're going to stay on that profile pretty much through the end of the program when we get to wheel stop for Atlantis.
And I would just add a little bit. We have this thing called the Shuttle Workforce Council, where we get together as a management team once a month and look at the critical skills in the program, across the program, from the processing folks to the launch team, to the support services. And so we're confident that even with the layoff coming in early April, that we're going to be able to fly the last 2 missions perfectly safely. And there is no other planned layoff until the wheel stop of the final mission, plus a few weeks, I believe it is.
Yeah, and I knew you were going to ask that. I didn't bring that part of my packet with me. I don't know if you guys have that handy. With the layoff coming, I wouldn't want to guess at the number. So,
Bill.
Bill Horowitz, CBS, with a 3-parter, and it's for one of the mics, maybe both, I'm not sure. But for Mike Leinbach, looking back on this processing flow, I know it's the second longest vertical flow, but would this be the most challenging thing you guys have ever done in flow? I know the hydrogen leaks back on 35 were a big deal. And a related question, I'm just trying to see how this stands in the constellation of shuttle challenges you guys have had. And the related question is, if this was a couple of years ago this happened, you had tanks in flow, would you have done this? Would you have tried to modify a tank? I know it's hindsight, but I'm just curious how this stands in that regard. And I got one quick follow.
Yeah, I'll let Mike take the what would we have done years ago with other tanks question. But the processing flow for Discovery, other than the people working on the tank itself, the work on Discovery has been really pretty minor during this downtime. We've made sure that all items that have a time limit on them have been changed out and ready to go. We've looked at all of our requirements on the books and make sure that we're ready to go, plus a few months in case we do end up scrubbing again. So most of the team really has not been taxed that heavily during this downtime. That's not true of the external tank processing people. They worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through Christmas, and got that tank ready to go. So those folks are to be commended to the maximum. They put in an effort that's unbelievable. You look back on this particular problem. This was a very, very difficult problem to resolve. The hydrogen leaks was a very difficult problem to resolve as well. Where would they stack up? They're probably the two most difficult issues the shuttle program has faced that I've been associated with since the early '80s. And in both times, we've come through. We've taken our time. We've fixed the problem. We've flown again, which is the mantra in the shuttle program: find it, fix it, and fly it. And so we've fixed the tank. We're going to fly it tomorrow, and it's going to perform perfectly fine. And for the other tanks?
Yeah, so let's see, Bill, for other tanks, if we were back 10 years ago and still in production, we'd have probably a little more resources at hand to look at material properties for other tanks. A lot of folks ask, why didn't we just swap to one of the other tanks sitting in the VAB and fly it instead? And with this type of problem, there was no guarantee that another tank doesn't have a similar problem. And until we find out what that ultimate root cause was, which really took us until after Christmas, we just didn't know what the actual driving concern was. Once you find it, then you can look at modifying. Had we had a couple other tanks sitting around that we could show weren't a problem, or that we could have started modifying while still doing a root cause investigation, we might have been able to fly a couple of weeks earlier than we are right now. But I think we probably would have played it out just about the same. The true the true driver to us being ready to fly was never fixing the tank. It was understanding the problem and being sure that our fix was the right one to do. So that was going to take as long as it took. I'm sure the analysis guys at MAF would have liked to have the workforce they had back then, though, to help them do the math. We were pretty skeleton force down there at the Michoud plant and at Marshall, but those guys really stepped up for us.
Okay. Dan.
Dan Billow from WESH-TV for Mike Moses. What sort of a moment will it be tomorrow morning when cryogenics hit metal? Are you so convinced by the testing that you've done that you're fine, or is it that when you're going to find out that the fix worked?
We know through all our testing and analysis that the fix is going to hold no problem. We've upped the margins on that manifold and that flange enough that it's not going to crack. So that's not to say we're not going to watch to make sure something unexpected doesn't happen. We have all the right cameras, all the right inspections in place. But just like the GUP, I'm not going to have any extra concerns when we get to the LOX level in the LOX tank that hits the flange, or when we get all the way to the top of the hydrogen tank and start venting off through the GUP. I'm highly confident that both those problems are behind us and not going to be an issue for us. Not to say we're not going to look for them, but.
Kevin.
Kevin Oliver with WFTV. Just to follow up on that, is there extra steps put in? Is there going to be an extra person out for the final inspection? Do you have more cameras out there looking at the cracked areas of the tank?
Yeah, we've got a couple extra cameras. I'll just walk you through the inspection criteria or the inspection process. Really, it begins at the beginning of external tank loading. The guys are in the firing room watching all the cameras we have out at the launch pad. Very high definition. We have infrared cameras looking for thermal leaks, that type of thing. So we'll be inspecting that tank for the full 3 hours of load. And then we send the final inspection team out to the pad. And they will do their standard walk down they'll stop at the mobile launcher 0 level, look up at the orbiter in the tank, then they'll go to the top and work our way down. Same number of people as always, same stops. You do have a special infrared camera they're taking out with them this time. But we've trained on that, no big issue there. So the tank will get a 100% inspection, and when the guys come back to the firing room and report out to us, the tank will be what it is. It's either going to be ready to go or there are going to be some issues. We don't expect any issues at all, but if there are, we're going to find them, and we'll talk about them. And as we always do, we have criteria for certain issues on the external tank. If it's a frost ball, typically they're go, depending where they are. If it's ice, that could be a different problem. Obviously, if there's some foam issues, that would cause us to talk quite a bit. But I assure you that this tank will get a complete inspection both from the firing room and by the final inspection team out at the pad before we commit her to flight.
Greg.
Greg Dobbs with HDNet Television. And this is probably for Mike Leinbach, but maybe Mike Moses as well. You referred earlier to nuances with Discovery, and you advised us to talk with people who deal with the flow on the floor. But are there any nuances with which you're familiar that you can describe to us, either of you?
I know of one in Discovery that I cannot talk about.
And I don't have any for you.
In the back, seated, please.
Eric Spivey with First Coast News for either Mike. As people start seeing the headlines of the final flight for Discovery, they think of it perhaps as the beginning of the end. Could either of you just talk about, do you agree with that assessment, and what would be your thoughts today on, or your message to them on the future of space exploration as they start seeing these headlines about this being the last flight for Discovery and the last 2 flights coming up?
Yeah, well, let's see. For us inside the shuttle program, the end, so to speak, has been planned and coming for many, many years. We've known this was happening. We've planned it. We've built the right way to go about doing it to make sure we maintain the right workforce and the right skill set. Mike kind of talked a little bit about how we're keeping tabs on things. So this has always been the plan. So now that we're at the last flight of each vehicle, me personally, it's not really changed anything other than we're just now executing the plans we've had in place for so long. From a public standpoint, I am getting a little bit of that feedback from folks around the country that know I work here and have said that, hey, I saw that this was the last flight. I didn't know we were done. And that goes, cuts twofold, right? It surprises me that the news doesn't get out, but we live in a very sheltered world down here in Florida, or back in Houston, or at Marshall, where the community is all space related and everybody knows everything about the space program. And so when I go out to visit my sister or my family and I get to see what the rest of the real world looks like, I get out in an awakening sometimes. Everybody's very supportive, and it's always that same, I can't believe we're going to stop flying shuttle, what's next? And we're still working on the what's next part. We have this path towards exploration with developing the SLS, the Space Launch System, putting a multi-purpose crew vehicle on top of it, funding commercial entities to help us get into LEO, low Earth orbit, in a little faster, better, cheaper way. All that's a really good future for NASA. It's just it's not the same as what we're doing right now, which is launching shuttles every day. So it's a different way of going about it. There's no good or bad about it. It's just we can't keep doing what we're doing with the budgets we have. So this is the new future. So again, now that we're at last flight, I don't personally really look at it too much differently. I guess by the time we get to the last flight of Atlantis, I'll have to actually decide what office I move to after this. So at some point it'll become a personal thing for me. But for right now, like Mike said, we all buckle down and fly. And I think we'll stop at Atlantis is about the first time any of us are actually going to look up and say, okay, now we're done. What's next?
Jay Barbary with NBC. Two-part question. If you need to rescue Discovery's crew, how many days do you need to get Endeavour ready to go and get them in orbit? And also the other day, Mike Servandini was talking about if he had his druthers, he would like to fly STS-134 in June and STS-135 in late August, early September to get the latest that you need up there. Is there any reason why you couldn't handle that, laying off the people you're going to lay off in April? The crew that you have on is good to the end of this fiscal year.
Let's see. So the first question about rescue, Atlantis is, I believe, from launch will be 59 days. I'm sorry, Endeavour will be 59 days from this launch. So from tomorrow, we'll have 59 days till the planned launch of STS-134. We stepped up a couple years ago to our launch on need flight being just the next flow. So that means that in that flow, there's time off, there's contingency days, there's holidays, and if we're in a launch on need scenario, we obviously wouldn't use those days. But there's two pieces to launch on need. There's to get the vehicle ready and out to the pad, and then there's all the flight software and other prep products that go along with flying the shuttle. Some of those can be accelerated, some can't. So it's at least 59 days. We could probably pull that back in and make it faster than that. But right now, the next launch is scheduled 59 days away. I believe the consumable situation up on station gives them, I think it's at 152 days of support, and that's without rationing and any of the other or resupply that we would count on for that kind of thing. So plenty of overlap on a crew rescue scenario. And then if we don't get to station,
how many days you need to get Endeavour to go get them?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The next mission, Endeavour, could be ready in 59 days to go. But as we've done all the work to look at what we're going to do for a crew rescue on the last flight, we really, crew rescue launch on need is now basically in name only. We know of the plan, we have the plan, we know how we would execute it if we would do a Soyuz-based rescue where we basically let that crew on board and let Soyuz rotations be able to bring them home. It would be a longer time frame until they're all back on the ground, but it would be an acceptable plan for a rescue. We haven't specifically looked at Soyuz rescue for these missions. We're saving it for the last one, but the concept would work at any time. And then, Jay, your last question, I had it there for a second. I lost it. So what was your second parter?
Mike Servandini said if he had his druthers, he'd like to launch 34 in June and launch 35 in late August.
Right. So one of the things I learned is we're doing manifest planning is everybody has some skin in the game and wants a little different thing. Suf would really obviously like his resupply as late as possible before the big honking payload bay of the shuttle goes away. And so he has this drive to do it as late as possible. The manifest and the flows down here have a thing. The workforce doesn't play into it. We'd be able to go longer. I think what's really going to drive us is the budget, and not so much a workforce question, but just at some point the end's coming. And does moving 1 month later change anything for the workforce or not? No. If it truly helps us out on station resupply and we have the money to do it, then sure, we should do that. If the money's not going to be there, then we probably ought to just go when we're ready. So that's going to be more of a headquarters budget action to see when we really can fly.
Stefano?
Yes, Stefano Golden for Rai Italian Television. I have one question, which probably will sound too simplistic. I don't know, but I find it hard to understand why a follow-on vehicle, launch vehicle, cannot be based on an ET, coupled with 2 boosters and engines and cargo on top. I mean, obviously, it sounds very I'm like it probably is sound like an total ignoramus, but I would like to understand a little bit more why it is so difficult.
Well, that actually is the design that we've kind of decided upon is a shuttle-derived follow-on that uses the same size core as an external tank with shuttle main engines on the bottom to be replaced eventually by a different set of engines, but basically fly out the fleet of shuttle engines that we have using solid rocket motors on the sides. They could be 4-segment to start with and expanded to 5-segment like we were planning on doing and have test experience with. And then you put an upper stage and a crew module on top. So that's effectively what we have baselined as our new space launch system. The exact trade details is a different part of my job, so I'm not in on all that as to how we trade it off and why you pick one architecture over another. And to say anything as a final decision is really not fair because there are so many variables in play. You got to look at total cost to get up and operating initially. You got to look at life cycle cost. You got to look at development costs and what's the right figure of merit that you want to trade on. So those studies have happened. They're still ongoing. They'll probably keep going until we actually have a new vehicle sitting on the pad. There's actually a group of people at Marshall and headquarters whose full-time job is to constantly design new launch vehicles and trade off their pros and cons. And so I think that team will always have a job because we're always looking to expand and change and see what we can do better. But yeah, it's a follow-on vehicle's coming. It's just you can't just throw the pieces together and hook them up and launch. You got to go do all the analysis, all the math, and obviously work all the budget that goes with it. I wish I could tell you that it doesn't take nearly as much time or money, but that's apparently what it does.
Yeah, that was my question. I mean, why so much money when all of these systems, all of these parts are proven? And I understand that coupling them in a different configuration may be a challenge, but what I wanted to know was, why would it take so long and so much money?
Yeah, I can't answer the specifics because I don't know the details of that new design and what drives it. But just as an example, in the main engine systems, the shuttle main engine is an amazing marvel of technology, and it's running at basically probably the peak performance of a liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen, turbo pump type based engine. And there's not many more tweaks we could do to it. And it's not sensitive, but it likes to have a certain set of inlet pressures and temperatures, and it needs its flow conditions to be right. And we've designed the whole main propulsion system that feeds that propellant into a set of 3 of them that are manifolded together. We know how we get the flow to line up just right, not have any recirculation, not have any cavitation and bubbles in the line. Now you go make it a 5-engine system, that you got to go redesign all that. And because of the lessons we've learned the hard way here at NASA is we want to make sure we test and not just fly. So you want to go build that up in a test article. You want to put it in the stand. You want to run it and bang it against. Now the engine itself we know is robust, but the engine's only as good as the inlet conditions feeding it. And so that's just an example. Spaceflight's complicated. Some of the answers are easy. Some of them are really hard. Just we could talk about the thing Scott talked about today with the ISS rack. It's a brace with 2 turnbuckles on it and a lock nut. You'd think that's a pretty simple load analysis to show why that's okay. But if you look at all the different environments that it will fly through, the different configurations, how much stowage is hard mounted to it, how much is soft mounted to it, the fact that the crew reconfigures it on orbit, all those pieces have to be looked at to make sure we didn't do anything wrong and caused a problem that we didn't expect. And so you're going to go throw a new vehicle together, you want to make sure you do all your homework.
Jim Siegel, Celebration Independent Newspaper. I'm interested in if you could, maybe Mike, describe a few of the specific modifications that are being made to 34 and 35 as a consequence of the issues that came up on this flight. What specific processes or hardware were revised or going to be changed?
We're going to basically do the same mechanical structural modification to the external tank. So on this external tank, we pulled the foam off of the inner tank region where it bolts to the oxygen tank. That's the tank at the top of the external tank. So the flange that goes around there at the top of the inner tank. We remove that foam. We go into the stringer tops that are bolted right there. We take off and drill out about 4 or 5 fasteners and add what we call a radius block, which is basically a thin aluminum band of metal that reinforces that area. So any load that gets added into that system due to assembly or at loading during cryo loading or ascent loads gets absorbed and carried by this extra reinforced band as opposed to the potentially weak metal underneath it. So that same modification will be applied to the next two tanks. We just finished that modification for ET-122, which flies on STS-134. In a couple weeks, we'll start that modification on ET-138, which is the tank for STS-135. So from actual physical modifications to the vehicles, it's the same mod going to be on all three vehicles.
Okay, come over here.
James Spahn with Nikudoga. Question for Mike Moses and for Scott. The first one is, has the Russian Soyuz fly-around been approved? And if and when it is, when will that happen and will we see that live? And the question for Scott, when is the first opportunity that we'll see R2 on the outside of the ISS?
So on the fly around, fly out of the Soyuz, we still have a lot of work to do. The Russians are off building trajectories. We think we've narrowed in on a flight path that they would then fly. And now it basically falls to the resources team on the station side to go look at finding appropriate for the attitude we need to be in, power, loads, and thermal issues to say that we can stay in that attitude for about the hour that it would take to do this fly around. Everybody expects that should work, but we got to go do all that math, and that's going to take longer than before launch. So we kind of put the line in the sand that by flight day 6 we need to have made the decision, and then we would probably execute by adding an extra day into the mission, either after flight day 9 or after flight day 10. So in the flight day 9 or 10 time frame is when we'd add a day to go do this fly around. And so we'll start talking about it pretty much as soon as we get on orbit and get a status every day. And if we know we're ready to make the call, we'll make it. But if we need to, we'll go probably as late as flight day 6 or so.
Would you extend a day just to do that fly around?
Yeah, the way we laid it out is the amount of activities needed for the crew on orbit. We would need to add that extra day in there to give them the time to execute this maneuver.
And as far as R2 is concerned, I haven't seen the latest plan forward for getting him unpacked and set up in the lab, but it may take a couple of months to get to that because there's an awful lot for the crew to do with all the hardware that we're flying up. And it's a fairly involved process to get him out of his launch enclosure, which is pretty beefy and has got a lot of fasteners that the crew has to undo. And then when they set him up, they're going to set him up in the U.S. laboratory along with a task board for him to manipulate. There's no intention of taking this version of R2 outside. That's maybe a follow-on version later on. If we prove the concept and prove that it works well inside and we can control it and make it do what we want it to do, then ultimately perhaps we can give it some more challenging and dangerous tasks to go do both inside and outside.
Ken.
Spaceflight Magazine. One quick question. What exactly is the status of 135, whether it's been approved? Another question is for the Mikes and Scott. Can you talk a little bit about the history of rolling the shuttle back with the payload in there and not taking it out, and why you don't have to check the payload? You said you didn't have to check the payload in the cargo bay at all.
See, so the 135 question, we've done at headquarters and with the shuttle program and our space operations mission director, the budget folks have cranked the numbers out and shown that for a CR that we would get that would run through the end of the year as a government funding bill, if that's the funding levels we get for NASA, we have a plan in place to be able to shuffle the money around and fund the flight of STS-135. So I'll say it generically how I portray it to the troops. The actual math I don't understand, but effectively we've gotten the letter from headquarters saying we will be able to fly STS-135 regardless of what happens with the NASA budget. Now, there's some caveats, right? They could slash our budget and we'd have to go redo the math. But for the given scenarios we see coming, we think we have a way to fund this mission and be able to fly it. So for all intents and purposes, we've switched to that's a manifested mission. It's planned, and we are launching STS-135.
And as far as the rollback is concerned, this isn't the first time that we have gone back to the VAB with a payload on board in the history of the program. It's been done a couple of times. I don't know exactly how many, but it has been done before. And once we're secured in the payload bay and in the fittings, it's a relatively benign environment for the payload elements. There's a conditioned purge running into the payload bay, keeps the hardware dry and cool. And certainly the vibration and loads environment is much less severe than what we see at liftoff anyway and through ascent. So we're quite content to sit in the orbiter for as long as is necessary and ride around with it as required. In fact, for hurricane scenarios, it would be very common for us to stay on board and go back with the vehicle if we had to roll back and take safe haven in the VAB.
Denise.
Hi, Denise Chow with Space.com. As Marcia mentioned earlier, Discovery is the fleet leader, and I was wondering if Mike Leinbach, if having flown the most missions and also the return to flight missions, how would you characterize Discovery's space flying career?
Well, she's been an amazing machine. She's done everything we've asked of her. You mentioned the 2 return to flight missions, and those were special for the processing team. In fact, part of the tribute in the firing room is based on the fact that Discovery flew both of the return-to-flight missions. And as you can imagine, getting the shuttle program back to flying after an accident is no small feat. And so Discovery came through in flying colors on both of those. She flies really, really well. I mean, very, very few problems on orbit. And I expect that to be the same this time. And again, we'll turn it over to Steve Lindsay and the crew at Liftoff and the flight directors out of Houston, and they'll perform the mission. She'll complete number 39, and then she'll be retired.
Second row, please.
Emily Baldwin, Astronomy Now. My question's for Scott. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the different science missions that you're flying on this mission.
Well, again, Robonaut 2 is one of the investigations that we're flying. He's a big one. And then Express Rack 8, which is back in the module, is a rack that on orbit we can plug smaller experiments into. It has a fridge freezer in it now that's going uphill with us. Up on the in the middeck, we have a variety of different experiments. First of all, we have some fridge freezers to bring back some samples from on orbit. The crew's been collecting urine and saliva samples, blood samples over the course of time, and we need to get those back home in a conditioned state so they'll be preserved for the investigators on the ground. We're also launching 2 animal enclosure modules. Each of those contain 8 mice, and they will be studying those mice and how they react to basically a respiratory illness, RSV. We have a couple of National Lab Pathfinder payloads. These are payloads that are in a series that are supposed to be, expanding our sphere from outside of NASA, getting other folks involved in doing research on the station. Both of them are biological in their nature. We have a couple of experiments associated with materials processing and seeing how materials react in the unique microgravity environment. And then we have a very unique one that's looking at the growth of fungi in space. As you may have heard, we actually get fungi growing on some of the surfaces in the space station, and so it's pretty important that we learn how to combat that. And so this experiment will help give us some more insight as to how to do that.
Robert.
Hi, Robert Perlman with CollectSpace.com with a question, I think, for Mike Leinbach. With tomorrow's ATV docking, just from a procedures standpoint, is there a certain milestone in the docking procedure, soft dock, hard dock, where you then can say, well, we don't have to worry about this any longer? And is there someone within the ISS program, the ISS flight director, that needs to give you a go to say that this is now no longer a concern and you can continue on with Discovery's launch? Thanks.
Yeah, in fact, we got a good update this morning from the ISS program that the ATV has performed a couple of the major burns and they went fine. And so right now everything's on track for docking tomorrow. We will be fully fueled with the external tank, assuming we start on time by the time they dock. They dock at 10:46 tomorrow. We should be done fueling at 10:25. Obviously, we have a direct communications path to the flight directors in Houston, both on the shuttle side and the station side. They'll tell us if there are any issues being worked with the docking itself. If they're minor in nature, we'll press on. If they turn out to be more significant, then the mission management team, Mike, will tell us what the issue is and whether we need to stand down for the day or whatever the case may be. So we've talked our way through that whole scenario. We believe we have a good plan in place to deal with any issues that may develop. I'm not expecting any. But again, we have good communications to those guys in Houston, and they'll let us know what's going on throughout the whole countdown.
Todd.
Todd Halverson of Florida Today, one for Mike and one for Mike. For Mike Leinbach, I was wondering what your thoughts are about having one of your own, a former KSC person on board. It's only happened, I think, a handful of times. And for Mike Moses, I was wondering what impact there would be on either launch or if you were on orbit if there was a government shutdown?
Yeah, you can have that one.
Yeah.
Let's see. As far as Nikki goes, good friend. We've been friends for a long, long time. But I remember as a test director, and she was an orbiter project engineer, essentially the chief engineer for a particular vehicle. We worked together in the firing room, and so we go a long way back. She may be the luckiest person at KC to become an astronaut and fly a couple of times. I may be the second luckiest person at KC to become the launch director. We go a long way back. It'll be very, very cool to send her off again tomorrow.
And then on the government shutdown question, it's way above my focus right now. I'm looking at technical readiness to fly, so I don't know the answer to that one. I'm sure someone's thought about it though.
Okay, Marcia.
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press for Mike Leinbach again. How many months once Discovery is back, how many months do you expect the routine post-flight stuff to take, and how long do you think it would be before you had the shuttle ready to hand over to the museum?
Well, let's see. We go through the standard turnaround process and the safing of the vehicle. If for some chance we happen to land at the Dryden Flight Research Center this time, there are a couple of tasks we will not perform out there just because we don't need to get ready for the next flight, for another flight. So we'll get her back here. It'll probably be about 3 weeks or so of standard mission safing. Certain payload mid-decks we're going to have to take out for Scott, those types of things. But we're going to take our time. We're not going to rush. We've got a plan laid out. We have a whole team called the Transition and Retirement Team. In fact, Stephanie Stilson's leading Discovery's T&R team. And she has a very, very detailed plan that goes out several months to get the vehicle ready and safe and get in a position where we could turn it over to somebody else. We're not going to rush through it. We'll take our time, but I think it's midsummer, something like that. We show on paper that it could be ready to go, something like that.
Irene.
Irene Klotz with Reuters. I have two questions. For Mike Moses, since this is Discovery's last trip to the space station, is there anything on the shuttle that it won't be needing for flight anymore that's going to be left on the station?
No, we don't have any planned scavenge type activities. I know we're doing standard resupply changeouts of station laptops and printers and stuff like that, but no, nothing that's a dedicated, you can strip the vehicle because we're not flying it again kind of plan.
For Scott, what's the status of the payloads for STS-135?
Okay, for 135 we have a FM2 Raffaello NPLM that's going to fly up and back, and this will be our last chance to bring big things home, internal things home. And that module is in its processing campaign right now, and they're in the process of getting racks installed. They've already been through their subsystem testing. It's proceeding very well, and Joe DeLay and his team are on track to go fly in June. Also flying on that mission, we have a lightweight MPES carrier in the back that's going to have a payload on it. It's a refueling payload that we're going to fly that Goddard has developed, that we can go practice some of the techniques to robotically refuel spacecraft in the future. And also there's an ammonia tank assembly that we're going to be launching with several hundred pounds of anhydrous ammonia that we'll be leaving behind. And all of that hardware is proceeding well towards that launch, wherever that launch may be, but as early as June.
James.
James Eam with Florida Today, one for Scott and one for Mike Leinbach. Scott, as well as this being Discovery's last flight, it'll be the last for Leonardo, last in a shuttle anyway. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the mods that you made to get it ready for long duration flight and what it's like from the payload side of things to have one of your long-term pieces of hardware to have to say goodbye to that.
Leave the nest and not come home, yeah. Let's see. Leonardo's been part of our family for over a decade, and so in some respects it's going to be, sad to see him go. But then, on the other hand, he's going to a better place. He's going to be left behind on the station.
I can't believe you said
I can't believe I said that either. But we're gonna actually put it to use long term. And I did the math a while back and figured out that so far Leonardo only has 40 million miles on it. That's a cream puff as far as spacecraft go. 91 days in orbit. But we're going to leave it up there for 10 years or more. And if I did the math right, that equates to about 1.5 billion miles that we're going to put on it over the course of time. And so maybe even, by the time I'm ready to retire, it'll still be up there flying around the Earth. So it's not gone. It's not sitting in a museum somewhere. It's in space where all spacecraft belong. So that's something that takes the edge off a little bit there. As far as the mods that were performed to it, the primary modification was to armor it up a little bit so that it can withstand the micrometeoroid and space debris flux that you'll see over that 10-year lifetime in space. So there was a very clever design that the Italians and we came up with to place some Nextel Kevlar fabric panels underneath some of the debris shields to give us that extra armor that we need to protect the module. We also did some other things. We removed some hardware to reduce weight so we could carry more useful payloads up to space. We also made it a little easier for the crew to work inside the module. And then we also left another special thing or two that I can't tell you about inside the module. One thing I can tell you about, we have a banner that's flying in the module that we've all signed, and the idea is we're going to get it out and bring it home and put it on display in Torino at the plant where the module was built. So that's a little piece of us that's going on the flight that's coming home. And I think, was there a third part to that question? Okay, that was it? All right, thanks.
Mike, as currently scheduled, should Endeavour be on the pad when Discovery touches down? And no. Okay.
No,
When's that?
We roll to the VAB next Monday, the 28th, and then out to the launch pad on the 9th. So if it all goes according to plan, Discovery will be home before that.
Are there any further questions?
Yeah, just a quick one. I just thought about. Do you plan to take the inner liner or the cargo bay of the shuttle, of Discovery, and hand out a little piece to each of the workers or other parts of the shuttle to the KSC workers?
There's a dedicated team looking at ways to commemorate the program and the orbiters themselves. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure the payload bay liner is part of it, but I suspect it probably is. We've done that in the past. We've made bookmarks out of them, that type of thing, cut out a 1-inch square and laminated on a bookmark. Something like that, I'm sure, is being planned, especially for the Discovery team. Again, a whole dedicated team looking at the morale of the workforce and what can we do to commemorate the program and have something physical that we can hand out, that we can show our families, and be able to describe how proud we are of having worked in this program. So there's something going on there. I'm not quite sure about the liner, though.
Okay, that's all the time we have for today's STS-133 pre-launch news conference. A couple of notes. Today there will be a demonstration of modification work done to Discovery's external fuel tank in the NASA News Center at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That will be shown on Ustream at www.ustream.tv/channel/NASA Kennedy. Again, the rotating service structure will be moved away from Discovery tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and NASA TV coverage for launch activities will begin live tomorrow morning at 7:15 a.m. Eastern. For more information on the STS-133 mission and crew, visit www.nasa.gov/Kennedy. Thank you.